afternoon, and welcome to today's Coresight Conversations, Tips from the Trade with VP of Supply Chain from the National Retail Federation, John Gold. And with that, I'm going to take it over to our host, Deborah Weinswig.
Thank you so much, Anna. We're very excited to be here today and to welcome John Gold from the NRF. This is our first Tips from the Trade. I'm your host, Deborah Weinswig, and I'm honored to be here with Jonathan. He is the Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the National Retail Federation. In this role, Gold is a primary spokesperson and is responsible for representing the retail industry before Congress and the administration on supply chain, international trade, product safety, and customs-related issues impacting the retail industry. While with NRF, he has been a leading advocate of the value of trade and global value chains to the U.S. economy. Today, we're going to discuss how COVID-19 is affecting the retail supply chain, how retailers are adapting, and how they are also planning for their future. As always, we'll have a video available on our site in about 24 hours, and we'll launch poll questions after we start the call. Lastly, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen during our conversation if you would like to ask a question. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan to introduce his role at the NRF and also what he's seeing right now in terms of retailers and their actions that they're taking as it relates to supply chain. Thanks, Jonathan.
Hey, Deborah, thanks for having me today. Very much appreciate the opportunity. So my role within National Retail Federation, I am one of the lobbyists who's on staff there. And my focus, as you noted, was on supply chain and trade policy issues. So certainly there's been no lack of issues for the past couple of years to work on, and now dealing with COVID and the impact of the coronavirus on the supply chain certainly has enhanced that work going forward. So looking forward to the conversation today and talking about what we're seeing, what our members are doing, and how NRF is trying to help our members in the retail industry as a whole.
Great. Can you talk about, just for starters, what you have done to help your members as it relates to the CARES Act?
Sure. So as once this all started, we realized that there needed to be help from the administration. So Congress quickly engaged on doing legislation to help the economy move forward. So we realized that we needed to be part of that conversation. So we were heavily engaged in working with members of Congress and the administration on the Paycheck Protection program that's out there for small business loans. We continue to work through some of the workforce issues that need to be addressed in the legislation. And we're continuing to work with Congress as they are. I think the House today will be passing the additional money for the small business loan program, and then turning their attention to a potential COVID-4 legislation where we think we need to have additional help for the larger retailers, large and medium guys that didn't get the benefit of the loans from the Small Business Administration. So, we recognize that liquidity is a major issue that everybody is facing right now. So we need to make sure that our large and medium-sized retailers are taken care of just as well as the small guys are.
I mean, Jonathan, you bring up something very important, which is this idea of, kind of large and medium retailers. One of our concerns has also been, the shopping mall REITs, because ultimately, right, they are the house that all of our retailers sit in. How do you see those relationships changing between landlords and tenants? And do you think that we'll, see different partnerships as we move forward?
That certainly has been an issue that we've been looking at, the lease rent issue. A lot of retailers right now are not in a position where they can pay. Their stores are closed, they're not generating any revenue. So it's very difficult to move forwards on payment. We certainly hope that the retailers and their landlords are working close together and forming better partnerships going forward so they can help each other to address these issues. That's something else that we're taking a look at, is how do we deal with these rent issues again that, you hate to see folks not able to pay rent, but it's a significant issue. So again, are there some programs we can put into place that are going to help both the retailer or, any other business that is not able to pay their rent at this point in time, and then help the landlords too, because, they're an important part of the equation as well. They need to make sure that they're able to continue to function and continue to provide the services that are needed. So it's, there's so many different pieces to this puzzle that we need to work through. And I think, as you noted, that partnership really is critical here. We need to have those good, strong working relationships that everybody understands what the issue is, what's at stake, and how do we get through this at the end of the day so that everybody is stronger coming out of this.
You mentioned something very important, right? Which is, these retailers, for the most part, on the non-essential side, are all closed right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is they have inventory that's aging. And since we don't have, I mean, it would be easy in some ways if we know, okay, May 15th, we're opening, we can get ready, we can, kind of do a big marketing push. We can then think about summer, back to school,
Mm-hmm.
holiday, right? We still have a lot of opportunities to work through our inventory. In light of the fact we don't really know when things are going to open, we don't know if all of these, shopping malls will open. How are you helping navigate, not only from an inventory perspective, but just, kind of, I like this puzzle piece, right? We don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. Right. How are you helping the retailers?
So we've actually launched a project that started this week called our Operation Open Doors project, where we're trying to focus on some key areas, bringing the retailers together with some outside consultants to really kind of work through some of these issues. So we're focusing on 4 key issues: logistics, which is basically getting your store back up and running, getting that inventory issues taken care of, making sure you've got PPE and cleaning products available, dealing with some of the marketing issues that you just mentioned. We had a call yesterday, and that was one of the issues that a member brought up, said, how do you plan appropriately, not knowing when you're going to open? How do you do a marketing push? And if you do a marketing push, say for Memorial Day, when you're open, and then all of a sudden something else happens where you now need to close down again, what happens with that whole program? The other areas we're focusing in on are workforce, which we know is critically important, getting the workers back into the stores, dealing with some of the liability issues that are incredibly important going forwards. Nobody wants to open up early and have some of the potential issues that are there. So those are the kind of the key issues that we're working through. Hoping to have some additional information later this week as we have all these different calls. We had, I was on the logistics call we held yesterday. We had, I think, over 100 people that were participating, sharing insight, sharing their issues. We had a lot of good insight from those retailers that are essential that have been open, sharing some of their best practices, which we think is going to be incredibly important for anybody to get back up and running, is to understand kind of what's been working thus far and seeing how they can take those learnings and translate that to their business.
Well, the challenge isn't even just right with the workforce from a PPE perspective, but also from a customer perspective, mm-hmm. right? You want to protect, the whole ecosystem. How are you thinking through that?
Again, a lot of it's going to depend upon what the kind of state, local, federal requirements are going to be. Obviously, as you look towards going to reopenings, if there are requirements that customers have to have face coverings before they enter stores, we're seeing that right now. There are a lot of local jurisdictions that are having that. Trying to figure out what that customer expectation is going to be is a challenge. We're going to see more folks that are relying on kind of the e-commerce, buy online, pick up in store, trying to make sure they're ramping up on their e-commerce capabilities, and then also looking at potentially store redesigns. Trying to keep kind of some of the social distancing in place once we get through this. I know I was in a grocery store the other day where they now have one-way aisles to try and keep that social distancing. So I don't think everybody realized that the store had that in place because you had folks that were walking both ways. But I think that's something that a lot of retailers are looking at is, trying to put those kinds of programs into place. I think we've seen also some of the sneeze guards that are up at the cash registers, those kinds of programs too. So I think retailers are really kind of looking at anything and everything right now, trying to figure out what is best for them to operationalize in their stores to get back up and running. We're going to have kind of counters outside. We're going to have limits on how many folks can go into a store as we currently have. I think all this are folks are trying to figure out. And I think the biggest concern though going forward is going to be dealing with a patchwork of different requirements. You've got a number of states in the Northeast that are trying to come together with their thoughts on how to open. You've got Georgia governor who said they're open as of Friday without giving folks any heads up on what they have to do. You've got folks on the West Coast, the governors are trying to come together, and you've got the national plan. So how does this all work together that for retailers that are national, making sure they're able to do what's required? We're trying to make sure we're working closely with the state retail associations because they're obviously on the ground and have been doing great work through all these issues, trying to make sure that we're working with them to make sure that there's a common message going forwards as we look at, how best to reopen the retail industry.
So this idea of risk and, I think coming out of some of these prior challenges that the world has faced. We've seen different types of insurance. What's the idea of kind of pandemic risk insurance, and how do you think that works?
So this is an issue that we have been working on within NRF. One of my colleagues, who I think actually started 2 weeks before we got into this whole situation, he has been working on what we're calling pandemic risk insurance. And again, similar to how the terrorism risk insurance worked back post 9/11, trying to put some of those kinds of programs into place. Because going into this, nobody had this kind of insurance available. So I think we all recognize that, this is not going to be the last time we see some kind of pandemic or some kind of business interruption. So is there some kind of new kind of insurance program that we can put in place that'll be, backstopped by the federal government to help companies in case a situation like this arises again? This isn't going to be something you can do to, retrospective and take care of what's happened thus far, but at least going forwards, being prepared for something that could happen in the future. So something we are working very hard on, and I think we're starting to see some draft legislation come through Congress, and we're excited to continue to push that out and get others on board to help support the thoughts.
So the results of our polls are in, and so the question around, has your organization already begun to invest in technologies and infrastructure necessary for the safe reopening of your business? 40% said yes, so 60% not yet, and 40% said they're currently in talks. Considering we don't really have, outside of Georgia, definitive times in terms of when we reopen, are those percentages in line with what you would have thought, or a little light?
I think so. I think part of it, obviously, you've got a number of retailers that are open, that are deemed essential, and even if they don't have their storefronts open, they do have their e-com business up and running. They're doing pickup in store, curbside pickup, which is, that's an issue that we pushed with the Department of Homeland Security as they put together their essential workforce guidelines and deemed what was essential and what wasn't. We tried to make sure that folks were allowed to do that. Buy online, pickup in store, curbside pickup was included as part of that. So I think that was incredibly important. But, I think a lot of companies are just trying to figure out what they need to do looking forward. So I think that is probably in line with what we're hearing, what we're seeing in talking to our members. I think, up until, I guess it was last week when, folks really started focusing on the reopening. It's not surprising. I think prior to that, where you got signals from, the president and other elected officials, a lot of it was just on, the response and recovery. Now we're moving past that response and recovery. Now the clear signals are there that, yes, we are going to open again, to try and figure out how best to put yourself in a position to be ready when you get that order. And, I think as, we talked the other day, you're not going to have everybody just open their doors to everybody to start. It's going to be a phased in approach, because I think retailers want to make sure they get it right. Because the last thing they want to do is, again, open themselves up to some kind of liability that they didn't do the right thing, that, God forbid, an employee, a customer, a vendor, or somebody else, gets sick as a result of something that the retailer didn't do.
Right. Well, and that's what's really interesting about our next question. I think, Jonathan, you and I had some really interesting conversations around this, which is COVID has left a lot of retailers confused about what the new store experience should be. What do you think will be our new normal? And 50% of respondents said showroom format stores try on and take home unworn pieces. And that seems to be kind of the prevailing wisdom right now. That will change. I mean, the issue is, right, these retailers have always operated in a certain way. Now we're asking them to, rethink entry into the store, kind of rethink the patterns in the store. And, this idea of, right, how do you, for a sales associate, right, having to go into the back and then bring the product out. But the other challenge we've heard is around sanitization of the, kind of fitting rooms.
Right.
So can you walk us through how all these, kind of, they're nuances, but they're incredibly important. How does this work in the future?
That I think is folks are trying to figure that out right now. I think that is incredibly important, as they're looking at what is going to be the new consumer expectation. How's the consumer going to shop in the future? Are they going to, what's the traffic going to look like? And I think, again, the in-store experience is certainly going to change. Are folks going to be wanting to try on product in store or not? And this gets into the whole issue of product returns. Is how are the product returns dealt with or handled? But I think the sanitization is going to be a huge part of any opening that the retailer does, is ensuring that the floor or the retail store from top to bottom, including the dressing rooms and fitting rooms, are all taken care of. I think it's, after each person goes in and tries on whatever they're trying on, is it the show or the fitting room going to have to be wiped down? What do you then do with the products that are tried on? You then have to sanitize the products in some form or fashion instead of just, putting them back out at some point in time. Do those products have to be cleaned and, made sure that they're safe and sanitary to reuse? So I think a lot of this is yet to be determined, but a lot of questions that folks are trying to think their way through. And I think they're really hoping to get some additional guidance from CDC and others on what the cleaning requirements are going to be. What are the learnings we're getting as far as the survivability rate of, coronavirus on products, on clothes? Like, how long is that gonna last? So all questions that folks are really trying to deal with and trying to think, be forward thinking on. But I think a lot of what's going to drive this is the consumer behavior, and what is the consumer going to expect going forwards.
Right. And then the last poll question we have was, returns were already a growing problem in retail. What solutions do you believe will be implemented and standardized in the industry? So 40% of folks thought that brands and retailers will increase the number of photos and include videos so consumers are better informed before purchasing. That's great for, kind of online.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think happens? And actually, I thought this was interesting, is which this has always been kind of my dream. 30% said final sale regulations will be implemented on deeply discounted items. I mean, maybe it's just final sale on everything we buy, and we don't have returns going forward. How do you think through those, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think companies are trying to figure out what works best for them. I know there are a couple companies that right now are not taking returns at all, and trying to figure out how they would do that in the future. On, again, one of the calls I was on yesterday with our members, a couple of them said they were going to take returns, but they'll hold them in the back for 48 to 72 hours before they do any kind of processing. So I think companies, again, trying to figure out what works best. Obviously you want to be as, helpful to your customers as possible, and you don't want to, annoy them at the end of the day. But I think we all have to recognize kind of the new realities and, how this is going to work and what the new reality is going to be going forwards. So I think, again, that return policy is something that a lot of companies are taking a look at and trying to figure out what works best for them. And then if they do take returns, how are they ensuring that, the retail associate is properly protected? Because again, you don't know where that product has been before it's been returned, kind of who's been exposed to it, what the situation was in the consumer's house. So I think trying to make sure you've got those protections in place. Do you move that to a separate part of the store than in the front? Yet to be determined, but I think a lot of folks are doing a lot of work trying to figure out what's going to work best for them, and could vary depending on the product as well. Obviously, apparel is going to be very different than toys.
Right.
So it's going to really depend upon the different products you have and how best to deal with those issues.
And this seems to be a time where, we kind of already discussed partnership, but you have, essential and non-essential retailers like Hy-Vee and DSW starting to come together. Can you talk about how you foresee, kind of this continuation of these partnerships? And retail has always been so challenging because there's such low barriers to entry, but do you think a lot of this changes going forward?
I certainly hope so. I think those partnerships are going to be critical going forwards. I think, as we were talking earlier, retail is a heavily competitive industry, and I think a lot of companies right now are looking beyond their competitive issues and trying to figure out, understand we're all in this together. How do we make sure that the industry as a whole gets through this and we're all better off in the end coming through this? So those partnerships are going to be critical. So trying to find partners that you might not necessarily want to partner with previously could be something you evaluate, trying to figure out how do you kind of work together on any variety of issues. Obviously the PPEs and cleaning supplies are critical right now. We know some folks are having trouble getting those products. So are there folks that you are close with, if you're in a mall situation, other tenants that you might be in high competition with that say, hey, let's put the competition aside for a while and work together to make sure that we can secure whatever we need. I know, one of the challenges of getting PPE out of China is you got to have these huge orders to get these products in. So can you combine a couple of different retailers together, say, hey, we're all going to go in and buy, 10 million masks or something like that. So how do you work through those kinds of partnerships?
And then do you think that this ends up, I mean, we keep on hearing, I'd say two threads. One is around, for those retailers who have strong balance sheets, whom might they acquire, right? And a lot of them are looking for, either D2C brands that, have a very strong kind of e-commerce platform, or, other brands that complement their portfolio. What we're also seeing is, and it was in some of the poll questions, this idea of, do we invest in kind of virtual showrooms or improve fit technology? And some of these quick wins, maybe more with startups than some of the larger tech companies. What are you seeing as it relates to thoughts about acquisition activity and then investments in technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the kind of the acquisition side, I think, folks want to hold off and kind of get through this situation and see how that works in the end. Because I don't think folks want to start, picking apart companies just yet. I think let's figure out how the industry as a whole can get through this and then figure out, are there acquisitions that can be made that can help, specific retailers going forwards. But I think on the technology side, certainly ramping up on IT and virtual is where a lot of companies are looking at now. That had been slow uptick on that. There were some companies that were further ahead. It always impresses me whenever we do the NRF Big Show and you see all the tech that's there and, the innovation that's there. I think a lot of that now folks can be really pushing hard on, again, to meet the needs of the consumer, because I think we all recognize that consumers can be shopping a little bit differently going forward. So you're going to see more and more of that. And again, it might depend on the retailer. Again, apparel might be very different than grocery or toys or consumer electronics. So I think, again, it's going to depend upon the individual retailer, but I think everybody realizes that things are going to have to change going forwards.
Now, I know many of the mom and pops are not necessarily members of NRF, but certainly NRF cares about all retail. It's funny, originally I was like, because thought we'd move through this faster. Right, mom and pops will do great, right? People want to get out, shop locally. But now I would say I'm increasingly concerned about how the mom and pops make it through. And I would define that as anyone with kind of 10 physical locations or less, just to kind of give it some parameters. How can we, how can we on this call help them? And how can they help their themselves at this point?
Yeah, obviously small retail is a critical part of NRF. 95% of retail is small businesses. So that's why we've been so active and engaged in the discussion in Washington, D.C. about ensuring legislation to help out the small businesses. I think you look at who's taken out the SBA loans thus far. I think there were 120,000 plus loans that were given to small retailers. So making sure that we're providing them with as much information as possible to help them get through this. And again, those partnerships are critical. So, if there's an ability for a small retailer to partner with a medium or larger retailer in town, we think that's incredibly important as well. But also the small retailers working together is incredibly important. And this is kind of one of the roles where the state retail associations play a critical role, because a lot of their members and even the chambers are small businesses. So how do they work together in partnership to, again, get through these kinds of issues? But I think they're as desperate as anybody else for some of the lessons learned and benchmarking to figure out what's going to work for them in the future. Obviously, there are, they can't do certain things just because of the store, the size of the store. So, restrictions on how many folks can enter the store is a little bit more restrictive for smaller guys than bigger guys. But I think however we can help as far as best practices, and helping them get through these situations is incredibly important.
I have many more questions for you, but we have quite a few that have come in. So if anyone else has questions for Jonathan, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll start to work through some of these. In your experience, what are retailers expecting from their landlords to provide in terms of guidance and materials when properties open?
That is a great question. I think that is, again, one of the issues we are trying to work through right now. We're certainly going to try and work with the shopping centers and try and figure out how do we work together on this. One of the questions that we're we're looking at is, if there are temperature checks required before consumers come into the stores. If you're a mall, is it the mall's responsibility to do that? And how does that work going forward? So I think, again, this partnership is critical. I think we want to be very clear going forward to make sure that whatever is decided upon as far as that opening up can actually work for everybody. So, I think the last thing anybody wants to see is, landlords say, hey, we're open, everybody come in, but there are no protocols put in place on how to actually do that. So this is where those conversations need to be happening now, among the tenants and the landlords to be prepared for whenever that eventual opening happens.
We've heard this idea of limiting entrances into, which would mean exits as well, but limiting entrances into malls from a temperature sensing perspective. And then the question is, right, if, these potential customers pass that entrance, do the retailers then need to temperature sense again before they enter the store? I mean, I know it's really in the weeds, but
no,
these
but these
are questions.
those are the questions you need to have addressed. Is, when you're looking at a double check kind of system, and then if you're limiting the number of people that enter the mall, you then have to continue to limit the number of folks that actually come into your store as well. So how is that going to work, and who's going to be responsible for those limitations? So there are a lot of questions, these in the weeds types of questions that need to be answered again before that opening can happen. So again, we know our members are thinking about this and they are asking the questions. We don't have the answers yet, but at least asking the questions and trying to work through some of the answers, I think, is kind of where we're focusing on right now, and trying to provide folks as much guidance as possible.
All right, next question. Is there an easy way to sanitize apparel that doesn't change its appearance? Would consumers have to be informed, this is a great question, when purchasing an item that has been returned now?
Great question. I don't know about the cleaning. I think I would leave that up to CDC to determine what is the best product to use and how it can be used. But that, again, on the returns, it certainly is a question a lot of people have, and informing folks whether or not a product has been returned before they purchase it could be something that they're going to have to do. Again, looking at some of the legal liabilities, that could be something you have to disclose now. We're not hearing of any requirements on that yet, but certainly something that folks might want to take a look at.
Yeah. All right. As a result of COVID-19, do you feel retailers have significantly increased the importance of supply chain risk mitigation? Do you have thoughts on port of entry strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, that risk mitigation has always been there, and supply chain diversification. Obviously, over the past couple of years, as we've been in the trade war, folks have been looking at their diversification. This certainly ramps that up, and I think supply chain has become even more important at the C-suite level. So a lot of folks are really paying attention to it and trying to figure out how best to go forward. So I think risk mitigation is going to be a key element going forwards that companies are going to be thinking about, and I think pandemic will now be one of those elements that is included in those plans. I think folks had thought about it previously. Obviously, when we had SARS, it was there, but not to this degree. So I think it certainly has, made its way up the chain for importance going forwards. And as far as port of entry strategies, I think this was from the outset when we first started with the virus in China, and there was concern about product not coming out of China and how do we deal with that. Our seaports are now trying to figure out, with volumes down well beyond where they were thinking, if there is a recovery, how do we get through that, dealing with some of the issues that are there. One of the challenges that we've seen is that with a lot of these stay-at-home orders and non-essential retailers being shut down, cargo not being pulled forward from the port to the distribution center, from the distribution center to the store. So are we looking at potential congestion issues at ports at some point in time that could lead to other issues? So again, this is where those partnerships are critical, working with your truckers, working with the ports themselves. I know a lot of the seaport executive directors want to talk to their customers and try and figure out what they need going forward. So, hate to keep coming back to it, but that partnership is extremely critical for all elements of your supply chain.
The challenge has been, right, for the retailers, right, we kind of muddled our way through the tariffs, so it's kind of been out of the frying pan and into the fryer. How are they, handling, these import duties and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the tariffs have been a huge concern ever since they've been instituted. We continue to push for tariff relief as a part of whatever stimulus goes forwards. We got a little bit of a victory with the Customs and Border Protection and Treasury announcing a duty deferral program. Unfortunately, it was announced late on Sunday night, and a lot of folks couldn't take advantage of it when they had pretty large duties due on Monday evening.
I say, wasn't it like 24 hours, right?
It was less than 24 hours where they had to split out the entries to take out your normal MFN duty rate from the trade remedy duty rate. And as we know, your normal MFN duty rates are, less than 5%. Obviously on apparel and footwear, it's significantly higher. But it was not enough time for a lot of companies to make use of that. So one of the things we're doing now is trying to push to get an extension of this program beyond March and April, look at May and June as well. And then also look at how do we get some of the punitive tariffs, such as the China 301, the steel and aluminum 232s, those kinds of tariffs included as part of that, because these are taxes, just like as we all know, and its administration has already pushed back and deferred business taxes. They should do the same on the tariffs as well. We'd love to see just straight out a suspension of the tariffs to help companies get through this time. But we're going to push for any and all options to help companies with their liquidity and address some of these tariff issues.
So there's a question around, if, let's just say if police officers or security are deployed to entry into stores or entry into malls, what about on the exit side as it relates to, retail crime?
It's certainly an issue that members are extremely concerned about. If you now have requirements that consumers have to have face coverings going into stores, that could open up opportunities for criminals. We know criminals are very smart. ORC has been a growing issue throughout the years, multi-billion-dollar industry. There's less ability to identify somebody if they have a face covering on and sunglasses. So certainly a concern folks have on going forwards. And, we were talking earlier, and it was noted that with all the folks that are unemployed right now, does that open up, avenues for folks to try and, steal things? So it's an issue, and folks are extremely concerned about how to address that. And I think if law enforcement is more concerned with enforcing, some of these COVID requirements and not necessarily looking at retail crime, that's going to be a concern going forwards. Obviously, you've had a lot of states and jurisdictions that have raised felony threshold levels, have made it more difficult to go after these kinds of crimes. But we think it's something that really needs to be taken. It needs to be looked at because it's a growing crime, and puts not just the retailer and the retail employee at theft, but potentially consumers as well. Because we all know that when products are stolen and resold through different avenues, especially for perishables, they're not stored correctly. So you're potentially putting a consumer at risk for buying a product that they thought was put in a safe place when it's typically not. So there certainly are consumer risks at the end of the day with this.
So we've heard a lot around onshoring and nearshoring, and you hit upon an important point, right? If we have high unemployment levels, are people willing to be retrained or reskilled into jobs that they potentially never thought that they would be doing?
Unclear. I think, as companies were looking throughout, the past couple of years, especially with the trade war, of, the ability to move their supply chains, obviously there was not a huge rush to move back to the States for a variety of reasons. The low unemployment was one of those, finding the right workers, making sure you have workers that are trained, infrastructure. A lot of what could come back would be high tech. So again, making sure you've got a workforce that is properly trained. It's going to take time. It's not something that can be done overnight. And even if you move near shore, again, making sure you've got the right vendors in place to do what they need to do. The biggest challenge has always been whenever you shift your supply chain, you've got to do your due diligence to make sure that your new partner can meet all of your requirements. You've got to go and make sure that your CSR requirements are met. Make sure that they can meet all the requirements from any kind of U.S. regulation, especially for consumer products, meet CPSC requirements, meet FDA requirements. And that takes time. Could take years. So this isn't something that's going to happen quickly with nearshoring, reshoring.
All right, we have another question. Does the NRF have a view on the strength of potential business interruption insurance claims?
We are certainly working on that issue. I think, as I noted earlier, one of the key issues we think needs to be addressed going forwards is making sure there are programs in place for business interruption and pandemic risk insurance. So something we are working very hard on getting through Congress, hopefully soon.
Great. And then just, as we wrap up, Jonathan, as, retailers on the line with us have questions or, as they're trying to navigate this, what's the best way for them to work with NRF?
Sure. Obviously, they can get in touch with me directly. My email address is goldj@nrf.com. Happy to work with, anybody who's on the call here, get them plugged into the work that we're doing, and see how we can best help them.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it, Jonathan.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.